want to say it's been a great pleasure to be Alexandria's chair this year. It's been really quite a good year for us. We've been in the black all year long, and our membership has topped 200 for the first time in a long time, perhaps for the first time. In my view, one of the reasons that we've been able to strengthen our membership and our attendance rates, apart from, I think, having a series of good programs, is that we've been able to keep our meal prices steady, which is something that's important to a number of our members. And that, in turn, is directly related to the great generosity that we've had from a growing number of sponsors. And I would like to recognize our sponsors now, and if you're in the room, please at least raise your hand and wave at us so we can acknowledge you. Alexandria Chamber of Commerce, Sherry, okay. Ann Ewan of State Farm Insurance, Barbara Anderson of the Life and Estate Planning Law Center, Dave Speck of Speck Codron Investment Group, Frank Fannin from SunTrust Bank, and Gant Redmond over here from Redmond, Peyton, and Braswell, Lee Gary of Sotheby's International Realty, Tobin and Donna Walker James of Honest Air Heating and Air Conditioning, Willem Pollock and Charlotte Hall of Potomac Riverboat Company, and William D. Ewell. Let's give them all a round of great appreciation. Okay. I'd also like to say thank you very much to my fellow board members. The talents and dedication that they brought to our group this year has made my job easy. And could those who are in attendance please stand? Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Okay. And I can assure you that agenda only runs as smoothly as it does because of the truly remarkable and sustained commitment of our executive director, Sherry Brown. This is our annual meeting, which means we elect a new team for next year. And unfortunately, Bill Cleveland and Patsy Tyser, who's here, are both leaving the board, and I want to thank them for their service over the last 2 years and tell them how much we're going to miss them. And we're going to miss you, Patsy. And we have a new slate of directors. It's on your table. And I want to thank Alan Dubois and the nominating committee for their work in producing that slate, which includes the remaining current board members and 2 new faces, Frank Fannin and Art Peabody. And Alan, could you please present the slate?
Well, as Russ mentioned, you have it in front of you. To start off with, our officers, our proposed officers for the coming year. Our proposed chair would be Terry Hauser. Terry, if you could let everybody see who you are. Our vice chair, Pam St. Clair. Russ, of course, has no choice about being the past chair. Comes with the territory. Continuing on as secretary, Connie West. And as treasurer, Donna Walker James. The remaining members of the board that we're proposing would be Tim Ahern, Shari Bellari, Roz Bovey, Michael Hobbs, Bruce Johnson, Alice Morgan, Roger Wad, and me. I tried to sneak out, and Pam wouldn't let me get away with it. So that's our proposed slate for the coming year.
Any nominations for? I got to ask for nominations first. Okay. Any nominations first? Quick. Okay. We have a motion to move the slate. Do we have a second? Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? No. Okay. Congratulations. Our board, yeah, thanks. Thanks. Okay. Well, it turns out that one of the very first challenges that the new board is going to have is going to be finding a new place to hold our meetings, because we were informed 2 weeks ago by the Holiday Inn that they will be closing in mid-July, permanently, with no prospects of a sale, apparently, to another entity that would use it as a hospitality venue. And as, of course, I'd be remiss if as one final matter, I did not urge you to renew your membership, or if you're not currently a member, to join Agenda Alexandria. Tonight's program was organized by Donna Walker-James and Bruce Johnson. Barbara Walters is already feeling restless. She called us. She asked if we needed an interviewer. We told them that Donna and Bruce would be doing the honors this evening. On your tables, you will see little colored sheets of paper. That's where you may write down your questions. Please print them legibly, as the program chairs sometimes have difficulty deciphering the hieroglyphics. And as usual, we will collect the questions at the end of the fireside chat, and then they'll be read, and Judge Dawkins will have an opportunity to respond to them, or not, as the case may be. So, Donna and Bruce.
Okay, in case there's anyone in the room who doesn't know him as a friend or a neighbor or maybe from court, but we won't say anything about that, I'm going to introduce Judge Nolan Dawkins. Obviously, we're going to be spending the whole evening with him, so we won't go through a lot of introduction, but just to give you a bit of a time frame. To start out, his good friend Janet Barnett has brought a picture, which is right up front here, of his days on the basketball team at George Washington High School. That was a surprise entry tonight. He lives here in Alexandria. He and his wife have raised 3 daughters, one of whom is here tonight. All are T.C. Williams graduates. He was a first lieutenant in the Army from 70 to 71. He's a B.A. from Central State, Ohio University, and a J.D. from Seton Hall University School of Law. He was a staff attorney in New Jersey, spent a little bit of time outside of Alexandria, and then returned to be an assistant city attorney. He was also in private practice for several years. And then he had a series of judgeships, from which many of you know about this, but the years from 89 to 94, he was the substitute district court judge and presiding judge of the Alexandria Family Drug Treatment Court. That part was, 2001 to 2008, he was a judge, as most people know, with the Alexandria Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court from 1994 to 2008, and is currently serving as on the Alexandria Circuit Court. And we'll talk about each of those terms. And he has 2.5 years left on his current term. He's a member of a number of professional organizations, have served on the faculty of numerous organizations, and these are all written down in the program on your table, a full biography. And he served for a speaker on many occasions, although we've heard he hasn't spoken much in public forums in Alexandria for a while, other than in court. And the last time was actually for Agenda Alexandria with Judge Rideout. So we're very pleased to have him back tonight. We do have some ground rules, given that we are interviewing a sitting judge. We may not ask any questions about pending court cases. That should be obvious, but we're going to be very careful about that, or past court cases in terms of specifics. We'll find out a lot about his role, but there's things that we cannot ask. And we just want to really thank him for taking the time to be with us this evening. And I'm just going to give you a quick sense of where we're going with the questions, and then Bruce will begin. And Bruce and I will alternate questions. We're going to begin with talking about the judge's family, his early educational experience, early years growing up in Alexandria, why he chose the law, his Army experience, his college experience. Then we're going to go to the circuit court and then go back to the juvenile court, because you all have asked questions online and through email, and most of them do relate to the juvenile court, because it's just an area that interests a lot of us. and then reflections on everything. And then, again, you've had a chance to ask questions. We'll just see how it goes. You probably will have a chance to ask some more questions this evening, and we'll just see where this interview takes us. So thank you very much.
Good evening. I think, as Donna alluded, Judge Dawkins, you have a lot of friends out in the audience, people you know. So if you could start by just catching everyone up on your family. How's everybody doing? Your wife, your daughters, and your grandchildren?
Well, first of all, let me thank you all for inviting me here. I got a call from Russ about 5 months ago, and I have been kind of staying out of the speaking business for the last several years since I've been in the circuit court. And Russ kind of pulled out his friend card on me and suggested that this would be a great opportunity for me to come in and speak to this organization. As I've said, I've been here, but we've done this before. Steve Rideout and I did this several years ago. But it just so happens, as I said, I've been kind of staying out of the speaking business, and I'll get to my family shortly. But this past year, I got 3 calls. In September, I got a call from the PTA president of one of the local elementary schools, and in September, and she says, we've been trying to get you to speak for the last several years, and you always seem to be busy when we ask you to speak at our graduation. So she said, so just in case you have developed an excuse for this year, we're asking you in September, can you speak in June? So I'm speaking at an elementary school next week. But let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised here in Alexandria, born at the old Alexandria Hospital on the corner of Duke and Columbus Street, for those of you who are recent Alexandrians. And I had my brother, my oldest brother, taught school here in Alexandria and taught me, was a music teacher here in Alexandria, and he went on to be the director of jazz studies at Howard University. My middle brother, many of you know, is an avid historian here in Alexandria and has done a lot to kind of create a new environment of knowledge with regard to what is happening here in the city, and especially as part of the African American community. My sister teaches in Detroit, and then there's me. I went to elementary school at Lyles Crouch. Went to Parker Gray, which was the African American school at that time. Now, if you are aware of the fact that we are celebrating the 60th anniversary of Brown versus the Board of Education. The problem is that Alexandria and Virginia didn't get the message until sometime and many years later. And therefore, in '63, I transferred to George Washington, which is the genesis of that picture there. George Washington High School. There were 8 African Americans in my graduating class. We went there as part of what was then known as freedom of choice. Not freedom of right, but freedom of choice. We could go, we could make an election to attend George Washington, and several of us who had attended Parker Gray elected to go to George Washington. Went from there. Once I graduated from George Washington, I played basketball, and contrary to public belief, most people think that if you're tall, if you're African American, you must be a good basketball player. I was an average basketball player. The good basketball players are on my left and my right, as you see that picture. I was an average basketball, and I went on to Central State in Ohio. I was an ROTC graduate, served in Vietnam. When I left Vietnam in 1971, I had some choices to make, and I turned down I thought was some really decent opportunities in the public sector. to go to law school. And I'll tell you the short story, and I know we don't have much time, but I, when I left the military, I was offered a job in Toledo, Ohio, and at Owens, Illinois, which is the glass manufacturer there in Ohio. The person who hired me called me up several days after my interview and said to me, we're excited about you coming to work for Owens, Illinois, and we would sure like for you to kind of make this your career here in Ohio. So I told him, this is how I got to law school. I told him, well, you know what? I've decided I'm going to law school. He said, well, have you been accepted to law school? I said, no. Have you taken the LSAT? I said, no. He said, well, how are you going to law school? I said, I don't know, but I think I'm going. Well, I think at that point he must have realized he had made the wrong decision. So I didn't take the job. I applied to several law schools, and how that happened is that I got out of the military in December of 71. I left Vietnam, and I exited the military. And back in those days, the old People's Drugstore is on the corner of Columbus and King Street. I went down to Columbus and King Street and got a book, and that book kind of indicated all of the law schools that had late admissions. So there was nothing great about me going to Seton Hall other than they were accepting people later than other law schools. So I took the LSAT, and that's how I ultimately wound up at Seton Hall. I was not married at the time. My wife had been offered a job with Johnson & Johnson up in New Brunswick, New Jersey. So going to Seton Hall was perfect. My girlfriend was going to New Jersey, and so was I. So we went to New Jersey, got married, and as a result, I've got 3 lovely daughters, one of which is Kimberly, which is over in the corner. I've got an older daughter, Kelly, who's just had her second child, and Ashley, who is moving to New York to become a publicist for a major corporation. That's my story. And take it from there.
All right, we'll try. We'll try.
All right.
What do you enjoy doing when you're not working, either alone or with your wife and family?
I am a couch potato. Watch a lot of sports, and that's pretty much the extent of my of what I do. One of my best buddies is an avid golfer, and over the several years he's tried to pull me into becoming a golfer, and a couple of years ago I tried it, and that's a dumb game. So the bottom line is I'm not a golfer.
Which sport do you like watching the most?
Probably basketball. Basketball and football. Yeah.
Tell us about the sports other than basketball. Well, perhaps you might elaborate more on basketball. Your family members played, I understand.
Well, all of my daughters were athletes, and they all played one sport or another at T.C. Williams, and they were pretty decent. I guess they were better athletes than their father, and but that was it in terms of family members participating in sports.
I knew the answer to that because my daughter played with Ashley on the TC team.
Right. By the way, Ashley's 6'1", so she's a tall girl. So,
how about music? What types of music are you interested in, and do you play any instruments or sing in any regular manner?
Well, I as I've said to you, I have 2 brothers. One of my brothers, my middle brother, was a real decent athlete in his high school years, and as I've told you, my oldest brother is a professional musician, and he taught music here in the city for years, and then he went on. He became the director of jazz studies at Howard. So I had two kind of disciplines pulling me growing up, either to be an athlete or to be a musician. I was not good at either. But probably better as a musician. And one of the benefits of being a musician is that during my years in Ohio in ROTC, every Thursday the troops went out and they drilled. Now we were in Ohio, and it's cold in Ohio, and every Thursday that was when all of the young troops went out and drilled. And I realized at some point that there was a band, and they practiced inside every while the other guys were drilling. The band was inside, performing and practicing, for parades or whatever. Well, I had a saxophone. I went home and I called my mother. I said, "Send me my saxophone." So, so the bottom line is that for the next 2 years, I was in ROTC. I didn't do much drilling with the rest of the troops, but I practiced with the band for the most of the time. And I was a fairly decent saxophonist at some point.
Any other instruments?
No, that's it. That was enough.
Do you still live in the house where you grew up?
I do. I tell people I didn't get far in life. I still sleep in my same bedroom. But yes, I do. We lived in Fort Washington for about 12 years when I moved back from New Jersey. And at some point, we were going to kind of a personal story. We were going to build a house in Fort Washington, and the realtor and I didn't get along real well, so I told her that essentially I knew when and how to spend my money, and I withdrew my offer to build a house in New Jersey. I mean, in Oxon Hill. My parents had deceased, and the house had been vacant for several years, and I decided that we would move back over here. So we remodeled the house, and we live in the house I grew up in. So I sleep in the bedroom I slept in when I was 10.
So how's Alexandria changed over time? What are your observations?
Well, I think that it has changed a lot, obviously, as you look around the room. I grew up, obviously, in a segregated community here in Alexandria. And Alexandria was nothing like it is today. And anyone who believes that we were just dropped into this community and we are what we are because of things that happened or didn't happen in this city, but things that happened created an environment of inclusion. And I'm very appreciative of the fact that over the several years, we have been able to be involved in and be a part of this community. I look up and I see John Porter over there. Now, John, when we graduated from high school, because I graduated from high school with John, he had a lot more hair then. But John and I grew up, and I as I said too, I went to Parker Gray, and it was something that I think impressed me more than anything else is when I transferred to George Washington High School, was that at Parker Gray we had one Wallen Sock tape recorder, and that was the foreign language lab, a single tape recorder. I went to George Washington, and there are microphones coming out of the ceiling. They had an entire room that was dedicated to foreign language. I saw that the whole concept then of separate but equal, and I think that that's important when we think about where we are now, 60 years from Brown versus Board. But 60 years ago, that was the education that was available to me at Parker Gray, and the education that I got at George Washington was so much different. However, I think that the education that I got at Parker Gray was equal in many regards because there was a different sense of involvement and participation by both the teachers, the students, and everyone else. Now, I won't sugarcoat it. I wasn't necessarily 100% accepted at George Washington, but I was accepted to the extent that I was an athlete. I think that probably gives some credibility for being an athlete. I was a decent musician. I played first chair saxophone. So I had some credibility issues going into the school, and I didn't have as many problems as many of the other students that may have had, but it was still at the end of the day, I went back to my community and saw all of my friends go back to another community. So it was a whole different world back then, as opposed to now. My kids have had a panoply of just a whole array of friends from different parts of the world and the community and everything else growing up, much different than I had when I grew up.
Tell us about your experience in the Army, and I understand you went to Vietnam, and how did that influence you in the rest of your life, both your time in the Army and in Vietnam?
Well, obviously, there's nothing I can say that would suggest to you that going into Vietnam was a good experience, because it was not. It was an experience where I survived. But the Army did a lot for me in terms of my future development, knowing how to provide for myself, how to deal with issues, how to be a leader. I think that was part of the real benefit of being in the Army. It taught me leadership, and I think that if a kid has any opportunity to, short of going into a war zone, it would be a great opportunity for many of these kids who don't have any direction down to go into some form of the military, if they could find maybe the Air Force, Navy, or whatever, in the Army, if you could avoid the necessarily of going into a war zone. Yeah.
You were a ROTC graduate, so you were a first lieutenant or second lieutenant, and how 2 years in the service?
2 years in the service. It's interesting because at that time, junior officers were not the greatest survivors, and you could get ranked pretty quickly, not because of what you did, but because there was just an opening based on what was happening at that time, and so many of the officers who were in service with me moved up the ranks pretty quickly, but I knew that I was going to give them 2 years, and that was going to be it. And I had other plans with my life.
What was your specialty?
I was a transportation officer, and that's the fortunate thing about that, is that I was one of several officers who got the transportation corps, and the transportation corps was at Fort Eustis, Virginia. So I came from Ohio to Newport News, Virginia, and then from Newport News, Virginia, I went to Petersburg to Fort Lee. Now, a story about that is that they told us when I got into the military that because I had a 2-year commitment, that if I were to see my second anniversary in the military, or I would pass my second anniversary in the military, that I wouldn't have to serve in Vietnam. Well, my second anniversary came and went, and I'm about 10 months left in the military, and I get a call from the XO, and he says, "Lieutenant, we've got your orders." I said, "My orders for what?" "To report to the Republic of South Vietnam." I said, "Well, you don't understand. I only have 10 months left in the military." He said, "You'll serve every bit of that in the Republic of South Vietnam." And fortunately for us, fortunately for me, as I said to you, the war was winding down. And as a result, the president at the time had reduced the tour of duty for junior officers. By the time I got on the airplane, my tour of duty had been reduced by 2 months. I went to Thailand on R&R, and when I came back, I got reduced another 2 months. So essentially, I only spent about 5 months in Vietnam, but as a result of the reduction in the service for junior officers.
You've answered several of our questions, so we're
Okay.
we're alternating here. What do you think?
What would you like to share about your early years working as an attorney, a government staff attorney in Brunswick, in New Jersey, and then in the city of Alexandria, and then your years in private practice?
Well, I don't think there's anything exceptional about that. I see Howard Middleton over there, and Howard is, was the deputy city attorney when I was there, and the one thing that I remember about Howard was that when you drafted an ordinance, he would redline it more than anything, more than most college professors would. So, but I think that gave me an opportunity to learn more about what was happening, not only in the law here in the city, but just the law in general. And I think it was a pretty much a very good springboard for me to go into private practice. I did a fair amount of eminent domain work, not only for the city, but for the state of Virginia, Commonwealth of Virginia. And it so happens that at some point I was doing very little juvenile work, but an opportunity came up, and Steve Rideout, who was then the sole juvenile court judge, he was completely inundated with work. He was working at 7, 8 o'clock at night, and he convinced the politicians that we needed a new juvenile court judge here in Alexandria. And as a result, I put my name in, and I became the second juvenile court judge in the city. It's interesting because I don't think there have been but 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 juvenile court judges in the whole history of Alexandria. So I became essentially I became the 4th juvenile court judge for here in the city of Alexandria, and I served for 14 years as a juvenile court judge.
I think Donna's going to get back to that subject a little bit more later.
Yeah, I think I alluded to the fact people have a lot of questions about that. But first we want to ask you, this is a question you told me it was okay to ask. Why has your appointment to the circuit court been called highly charged political wrangling? Please give us some background on that.
I told you it was okay to ask, but I just realized I've got to go back down there again. So
okay.
I'm going to pass on that question.
Okay. Well, many people in the room maybe know, but okay, we will move on then.
We will.
Okay.
We're glad you made it.
Yes, we are glad. Okay, so tell us what types of cases are handled by the circuit court. What is the circuit court? Many people may know, but give us a definition.
The circuit court is the highest trial court in the Commonwealth of Virginia. That means that we do civil cases that there is no limit on the dollar amount, and we do criminal cases and have the ability to incarcerate people for a long time, and ultimately we do have the authority to impose the death penalty if there's a capital case. So the gamut, the very strong gamut. It's a jurisdictional amount in our court, on the civil court, that we only handle cases involving a certain dollar amount. We only handle essentially felonies in the criminal side. However, cases is appealed from the district court, both the general district court or the juvenile and domestic relations court. We can hear an appeal, so we essentially act as an appellate court for the district courts.
Okay. And how would you describe a typical day in the life of a circuit court judge? Is there a typical day?
The day is there is no typical. I know you said you're going to get back to the juvenile court, but very different than being when I was on the juvenile court. We have in the circuit court, we have law clerks, we have staff, we have people who essentially provide a great deal of assistance for us to prepare our cases, and as such, our job is made a lot easier, not because of what we know, but because of who we have working with us. Yeah.
What do you enjoy? What aspects of your job as judge do you enjoy the most?
Going home.
That brings us to the next question.
Follow-up question
Okay.
is, what things would you rather avoid doing in a job? What do you delegate to your clerks, I should say?
We do a fair amount of domestic work here in the city. We have one of the largest divorce dockets in the state right now. and one of the things that, and I've done this not only here and on the circuit court, but we do a lot of cases involving custody and support, visitation, and I do something that I've been doing for now. I guess a young lady told me the other day, an attorney told me the other day, and I was going through what I call my spiel. She says, "Judge, you've been doing that for 2 decades." And I had to think about that. I said, "That's 20 years." And she said, "Yeah, you've been around 20 years." So, but what I do is, one of the things that I take pride in, especially in the cases involving the family matters where people are having difficulty making decisions about what's best for their children or themselves. Before I will hear a custody case, I will always go out into the court and ask them 2 questions. Several questions. Have you had an opportunity to talk? And many times they have not. And I look out in the room, just like in this room. I look out in the room, and I kind of canvass the room to see if there are any gray hairs in the room, the family members. And then I go into the spiel about me being the stranger. I'm the stranger in this room. I don't know your child. I don't know anything about their good points and their bad points. You know more about your child than I do. You have the ability to make the decision about what's best for your child. And if you had the opportunity to have a stranger do it, I would avoid that. And and what I do is, when I do that, I look out for the gray hairs. And when I see the people with the gray hairs doing this in the back, that's the grandparents. They're doing this. I give them the opportunity to go out in the hall and make a decision about that case. Well, my clerks think that I'm a magician because I can really clear my docket up. My docket gets cleared up pretty quickly in those cases. And so when I've got a case that's scheduled for multiple days, and I can go out and I convince the people that it's best for them to make the decision as opposed to me to make the decision for them, then it works for the court, it works for the family, and rarely do I see those people back in my court if they make the decision for themselves.
How do you approach making difficult decisions, ones that are close or hard? And I know you can't talk about any specific cases, but what's the mental process that you might go through?
Well, I don't think there's a mental process. We have the law. We have to apply the law. And by applying the law, sometimes we have to also deal with human nature. And I used to tell people all the time, especially when I was downstairs, is that those young people, I have some of the experiences that they had, I had, so I can really appreciate some of the things that they were going through, and notwithstanding the law, I was able to make a decision that would incorporate the law, but would also incorporate a human factor.
What advice might you have for any adults? And you said earlier, Russ, I think, said none of you have been before Judge Dawkins, but should we appear in front of you, what advice would you have for us in our court behavior?
Settle your case. Talk. The bottom line is it's so, especially if it's a civil matter, it's so easy to sit down and make a decision that would benefit. I'm good. It would be very much so in your best interest if you appear before any judge, not just me, but any judge, and at least have the opportunity to make a decision based on what you believe to be in your best interest.
Bruce and I will share. See if that one's better.
So. I've said more, at least once now, it's important that, especially in the civil arena, that it's important that you decide for yourselves as opposed to letting the judge decide. Because the bottom line is that in many times what I have, and especially in domestic matters, I don't have the benefit of that human side of it. Now, when we talk about the civil cases where dollars are involved, that's a whole different story. And those kind of cases don't necessarily get settled as readily as I believe the domestic cases should be settled, because dollars involved, and you have contracts, and you have to kind of abide by the terms of those contracts, and there's sometimes there's right and wrong based on how it's approached by either of the parties.
Okay, now we're going to. Okay, it's not on now. Okay. Now we're going to ask about the Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court, and can you tell us kind of the general definition, what types of cases come before that, and then we have several specific questions.
Well, I'm not in the juvenile court anymore.
Well,
but,
we know, but
okay, but
14 years.
Okay, but the bottom line is that it speaks for itself. Juvenile and domestic cases. Any child under the age of 18 who has committed a delinquent act, who have failed to go to school, there can be what's called a CHINS petition, a child in need of services. On the criminal side, if someone has committed a crime against a child, it's in the juvenile court. If the child has done a delinquent act, then that's an act that would be before the juvenile court. Now, I'll tell you, one of the things that I was really proud of when I was on the juvenile court was that I started Steve Rideout and I started the Commonwealth of Virginia's first family treatment drug court. And that court was one that was very unique in the nature of jurisprudence, in that it wasn't a matter of bringing someone to court to punish them, but to do whatever it took, especially in the cases where children had been taken and children had been abused by a parent who had abused drugs or had abused alcohol or whatever, giving them the opportunity to recover, giving them the opportunity to think about how to retool themselves, and as a result, giving them the opportunity to get their child back. And I think that was one of the most, you asked me earlier about one of the most rewarding parts of my career. That was one of the most rewarding parts of my career, when I would go out, leave the bench, and see a parent who had for months or years, however, had abused substance of some kind, and he had gotten well enough now to get his child back. And I get off the bench and I could go down and hug that parent and say to him, you've done a great job. And so what's so funny now is that I still, although I'm not involved in the drug court, we don't have a drug court anymore, but but I still see a lot of those parents, and it's so interesting, because when I see the parents in the community, the ones that are doing well, they always run up to me and give me a hug, and the ones that are not doing so well, they kind of go the other way. But there was a component of failure, and that's all part of that system. Some people were able to succeed in the drug court, and some weren't. But those that were, I think that they have maintained. Many of them have gone on to live productive lives, and their children are living productive and are better off for them as a result of having been involved in the drug court.
We actually had several questions about the drug court, and now I'm concerned that it doesn't exist anymore. Can you tell us what happened or what's replaced it?
I don't know. I don't
okay.
know. No.
A topic for a future agenda, Alexandria. Okay, more questions about juveniles. From your years on the juvenile court, do you think progress is being made in juvenile offenses, their number and severity? Do you keep up with that?
I don't, but one of the other part of being a juvenile court judge, and I know that we've kind of regressed, and we talk about the juvenile court as opposed to circuit, but one of the real benefits I thought about juvenile court was we had the ability to change people's lives, the children's lives, and I'll anecdotally, I'll tell you this story. Several years ago, I was in my front yard cutting grass, and a SUV circled my block with tinted windows, slowed down in front of me, circled the block again, slowed down in front of me. Then the third time, circled the block and stopped. And this man got out of the car and he said to me, "You don't remember me, do you?" I said, "No, I don't." He says, "Well, I'll tell you this." He says, "My son was before you several years ago, and the court services staff wanted to send him essentially downstate, and you declined to do it. She said, I want to tell you this. He is now in his second year in med school in Boston. And he said to me, you know, but for the fact that you made the decision to not do what perhaps was logical for you to do, as opposed to what your heart said to do, this kid would not, he's probably saving lives right now in someone's community as a doctor somewhere. So there's a, you know, there was a component of being able to change lives that sometimes in the circuit court it's kind of late, because we're dealing with adults who are doing adult things and have had a history of kind of doing those things that are either immoral or illegal, and it's a very different kind of arena in the circuit court as opposed to in the juvenile court. So the juvenile court has a really a strong basis for change.
I feel like you were just really well known in the community now as well, but as the juvenile court judge, because again, that's where a lot of the questions are. But I know I spent a year at T.C. Williams teaching a course called Street Law, and all the kids would refer to you, and they would question the book I was teaching from and say, well, Judge Dawkins would say this, or he would say that. And the only unfortunate thing was that I'm afraid they all knew you for the wrong reasons rather than the right ones.
Well, when obviously when John was the principal there, I'd go up to school from time to time, and it always amazed me. You know, there's supposed to be a level of confidentiality in the juvenile court. What happens there is supposed to stay there so that the kid doesn't have a stigma with regard to something that he or she has done. Every time I walked through that door, you would hear, "There goes my judge." So there was this confidentiality that went out the door, but it didn't work, and but you know that's life. I think that it wasn't a matter of them kind of being a little hesitant to say what they were saying about me being their judge. They were just this part of saying, I know that judge.
One of our questions about what pieces of advice did you give kids? Maybe do you still give kids? Because you said sometimes they make it into the circuit court, or if something's appealed. But the kids would talk a lot about how many things they learned from you, like life lessons.
Well, several years ago, we had a program here up at T.C. Williams celebrating the 100th anniversary of the juvenile court. And we had the young people at the detention home do renderings of drawings of what they believe to be, their experience in the juvenile court. And I still have those drawings in my closet. And you can't imagine some of the things that you would have, what they were thinking about me, and how the words that I probably said to them, I didn't realize I was saying, but it kind of stuck with them in their minds about, how best to approach life a little differently.
What would you like to tell the audience about foster care and adoption? Again, that's a whole different ball game. I'm not in that arena anymore. But when I was there, it was very important. One of the most rewarding days you're going to ever experience. And I strongly suggest to those of you who haven't had this opportunity, every November celebrates National Adoption Day, and during National Adoption Day, you can see some of the most heart-pulling events to see these people these families who are adopting children who have been in the system, and giving these kids the opportunity to live a different life than they have grown to know as part of who they are. And I tell you something, there have been parents who, several times that I've been back. I go back every year. I'm a part of that, because kind of that whole environment. I go back because I just love to see those parents who are adopting one, two. See parents who will adopt several children.
But we don't have, in this country, obviously, we probably remember when we had the concept of a not in a foster home, but a orphanage, yes. But we don't have orphanages, and we have the system of foster care. And foster care is one, and that's when an adult steps forward and say that they will provide care for a child who has been abused or neglected in this community. And I think we have been very fortunate that we've had some great foster parents who have been involved and who will, and quite frankly, not only involved, but it's not uncommon that they ultimately will adopt those children.
What should the audience know about court-appointed special advocates, the CASA program?
It's been a long time. Where's Barbara Beach? Barbara, tell us about the court-appointed special advocates. Go ahead, tell them, Barbara. That's right. All right. Tell them, Barbara.
All right. You're having a sore throat.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll stand behind you, Chris. CASA workers are probably one of the most important components of the juvenile court. Sorry. CASA workers are people like people in this room who go through training and continually go through training, and they assist the attorneys, the judges, the social workers, and everybody in the court system in helping understand how a child would be best served by the court. And I think the thing that they offer, and I'd like to encourage anybody who's an interest to do it, the thing they offer is a perspective that all the people who are involved in the court who have professional leanings, sometimes you just miss the human things, and the CASA workers go extra length to make sure that they present to the judge the human things that you need to know. Did I forget anything?
Great.
And there's going to be two sides to this question, so, but what are
Sound-
you most...
It sounds like a case.
I know,
There are always two
On
sides.
the one hand and the other. What's impressed you most about your hometown, Alexandria?
I think that I believe that we are very unique in terms of just our involvement and our system of inclusion. Kids have a greater opportunity here than in many other jurisdictions. I never could understand from time to time. Again, when the kids would come to my court, and I know that they were coming from a system that was spending thousands of dollars to make their education and make them do better in life, and they would kind of just throwing all of that away. But so much of what it was in Alexandria and what it is in Alexandria is so much different. And I've seen the evolution of exclusion to inclusion, and unfortunately, I wish that we would have more kids who were willing to be included and participate in what is being offered for them in terms of all of the services and all of the other opportunities that they have in the city.
The other side of the coin, and be gentle and judicious with us, but what advice would you have to your city about becoming a better city at the moment?
I don't have a clue, and I think we leave that to the politicians. They have to decide, what they believe is best for us, and from time to time, I guess as a citizen, I may disagree with them. And certainly you understand also that from time to time, when there is a dispute with regard to the city, it ultimately comes to me as a circuit court judge. So I don't have any real kind of comment on that topic.
Understandable. To change gears a little bit, over your lifetime, what's the most significant event that's influenced you, or you sort of would say has had the biggest impact on you? Either a personal event that we might not know about or some historic event.
You know, I think personally, just having a, you know, I've got a great family. I've got a great, you know, as I said to you, my wife and my kids have really kind of been kind of my backbone. And I used to tell the kids all the time, they knew that I was in the juvenile court, and I've got 3 daughters and or 4 wives, depending on any given days. So as a result, my wife couldn't make it today, so she called my daughter and said, "Get over there and take my place." Well, you know, they're integral. They exchange in many different ways. But I used to tell my kids all the time, my daughters all the time, was being in the juvenile court. They'd come home and they would you know, tell me about maybe a young man that they thought they were interested in. Now, I can't talk about these people that I see in court, but if they would mention someone, and if I kind of would rock back in my chair, don't bring him near my house.
Okay. Who is your hero or your heroes?
You know what? I would think that my heroes were my parents. Both of them are deceased. Neither of them had were educated. My dad worked sometimes three jobs a day. I knew where he was every day. You know what? I tell people all the time, I was fortunate in that I knew where my father was almost every night of his life, even when I was in Vietnam, because I'd call him up from time to time. But no, I think that more. But my parents probably influenced me. My brother was my oldest brother was the first one in my family to graduate from college, and it was important to my parents that we did better than they did. You know, I've got a photo on my wall of my father, and when he went into the Navy in a segregated military, and he was considered grandpa because he was 32 years old when he went into the Navy to serve it in Pearl Harbor. And but to answer your question, my parents, if I had to tell you who influenced me more than anyone in my life, it was my mom and my dad.
So so the next question is, who influenced you most in your career?
I can't say specifically anyone influenced me in my career. I think I had a lot of people who kind of helped me along. And you know, quite frankly, from the very beginning when I came to this city, Des Cali, Des said to me, I applied for a job here in the city. I was licensed to practice in New Jersey, and I came down and asked, you know, because I wanted to come back to the city, and I told him that I would like to, you know, get a job with the city attorney's office at some point. Well, I wasn't a member of the Virginia bar at the time. I was a member of the New Jersey bar. I came back and I applied, and there were several applicants I know that had applied at the same time. But I tell you one thing he said to me, and I obviously we were kind of moving into the era of affirmative action, and I said something to him, and he responded to me in a very positive way. I said, you know, I know that you needed to have an African American on staff. He says, no, I wanted to hire the best, And he said, I hired you because you were better than all the rest. And I said, well, that says something to me, and I carry that with me for quite a bit.
If there was some...
And I'll tell you this, too. My good friend, Gerald Lee. Gerald Lee and I, from time to time, who's now a federal court judge. Gerald and I kind of grew up in terms of our professional career. Gerald was very influential in terms of me getting my first substitute judge, as a substitute judge. And he was very influential in that aspect of it. And, I'm very appreciative of what his role was in terms of me being where I am now.
Well, we've talked a lot about your life and different choices and directions you've gone.
Have we talked enough?
No. we have what they call in the judicial and the legal profession a hypothetical for you.
Yeah.
If you were to do it all over again, if you had a do-over, would there be something in your life you'd want to do differently?
Well, I'll tell you this. When I went to undergraduate school, as a biology major. I wanted to be a doctor. And there are a lot of frustrated lawyers who wanted to be doctors, but I wanted to be a doctor. And I did fairly well my first year, maybe year and a half, until there was this thing called organic chemistry, and I'll never forget this night. I didn't do real well in chemistry, and my good friend Brian Bowles, at the end of the semester, you had to turn in your lab notebook. And Brian came down to my room, and we were comparing our lab books, and he looked at me and said, Nolan, were we in the same class? Well, Brian, before age 50, retired as a doctor, and he's living in the Bahamas right now. He went on to med school, and he became a doctor. So obviously we weren't in the same class, but I made a decision at that time that maybe biology and medicine wasn't going to be my bailiwick. So I went and told the dean of the biology department. I said, Dr. Holmes, I'm changing my major. And he tried to discourage me. He said, maybe Mr. Dawkins, you just hit a bump in the road. Stick with it. I said, Dr. Holmes, I want to tell you this. I'm going to leave this building, and I'm never going to come back into this building. And my daughter can attest to this. 20 years later, we went back to my homecoming, and I went back and said, this is my first time in this building, and that's the seat I sat in, but I never went back into that building again.
Okay. If there are some questions from the audience, if the board members who are there could sort of collect them and gather them up. All right. We'll have a couple questions while we're collecting the audience's questions.
Okay, as I read your resume, I was wondering, it seems like you go out and share a lot of information with other areas, and I was wondering, are there things that Alexandria serves as a model for other jurisdictions or our region or nation?
Well, in the past, when I was on the juvenile court, Alexandria was one of 13 model courts in the nation under the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. And there were courts from around the nation that would come to Alexandria to observe how we did things.
All right. This is a sort of a judicial procedure question. Is it a good idea or a bad idea that judges decide sentences in circuit court cases? Do laymen have enough expertise or frame of reference?
Wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Next question.
Next question.
In child custody disputes, how much credence do you give to the assigned social counselor? Well, that's the phrasing here. Is his word or her word trustworthy?
I think that assigned person, you're talking about a GAL, a guardian ad litem. And a guardian ad litem plays a very important role. Kind of, if a guardian ad litem has been appointed to represent the child, he plays a very important role, kind of, in filtering out kind of the two sides, because obviously each side is going to have his or her position. The guardian ad litem is the person in the middle, and it's very important. How much do I consider that? I give some consideration, but ultimately I make the decision about what happens in a custody case.
This question you can take or leave. I'm not sure what you want to do. There's a disturbing trend that political money is now flooding into some state and local court elections of judges. Can anything be done to stem this flow of money, since all elections are nationally funded rather than locally funded?
No, I can't answer that. You know, the bottom line is Virginia is one of two, and I may be wrong about this, and don't quote me, but I believe that Virginia and South Carolina are the only two states that where judges are appointed. Now, in many states, the judges are appointed by the governor or whomever. Virginia is appointed by the General Assembly. Those other states, if there is a system of appointment by the political side, those judges set for retention after they serve their first term, and pretty much they serve for as long as they don't do anything wrong. But in terms of whether there's money, I don't know whether that's a good idea or not. I've had some colleagues in the past nationally who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars for campaigning for judgeships. Now, whether that's good or bad, I can't explain, because I haven't had that experience.
Okay, here's a fun one. How did you find time to be a lunchtime reading tutor, and how did that? What did you learn from that experience?
I learned how to read.
Did you really took time during your busy schedule to be? I think that's just wonderful.
Well, what happened was years ago we had that consortium that went into the public schools and kind of took a child and helped that child learn to read. And so for a year, Steve Rideout and I alternated each day. And we went down to Jefferson, Houston, and each of us took a child and attempted to teach the child or help that child with his or her reading abilities, skills.
No matter how much you knew about Judge Dawkins, I bet you didn't know that. Okay, here's a question from our audience. What is your legal, not political, opinion on the Virginia Attorney General not enforcing the state constitution on marriage between a man and a woman?
I wonder why anyone thinks I would answer that question.
Okay, that's why we have more questions. People are often given community service rather than jail time. Why, and how effective is it?
Community service can be effective because there are lots of offenses that don't necessarily warrant a child or an adult, for that matter, to be incarcerated, and at least give that person the understanding that there are consequences, and community service is in fact a consequence.
All right, an easier question. So you used the language lab equipment. What foreign language were you learning, and do you still remember any of it?
English. No, I don't. No.
Okay, a tougher question. Which daughter do you love the most?
The daughter that's here. And the two that are not.
I think we're finished with the questions from the audience, and I'm going to let Russ sum up here at the end, and want to express my appreciation to Judge Dawkins for being here.
Well, back just about the time that, is this on? Okay. Just about the time that Agenda Alexandria got started, my older daughter and Kim played on a soccer team together for a couple years. And Judge Dawkins and I did the equivalent of circuit riding. It's a little different than judicial circuit riding, but we'd go out to Severna Park and Poolsville and Wharton and out to Columbia, Maryland every Sunday afternoon. And one day we're out in Montgomery County, we're walking over to a soccer field, and we walked by a basketball court, an outdoor basketball court. There's a couple kids playing basketball out there. Judge Dawkins says, "Give me that ball." And we're about from me to Connie Ring. Judge gets the ball, throws it up, swish. So you're 1 for 1 at that point on 3-pointers, and I think you are now 2 for 2 after tonight. Very good, thanks. So Donna and Bruce, thank you very much. And I would like to say that one thing that we have done that I think is unprecedented, we have set our agenda for next year. And you will see that on the table. And we have a number of programs that I think we've got some good ones. We have firehouses, sewer infrastructure, art in Alexandria, moving people across Alexandria's congested grid, what happens after Genon, and a couple more. So I hope you all think about joining us again next year. Thanks for attending tonight. Look for our brochures in the mail, and enjoy your summers. Good evening. Thanks.